My wife told me I was overreacting after I discovered she had secretly named her affair partner as the emergency contact for our children without ever telling me. Yesterday started like a normal weekday morning. Kids half dressed, backpacks half zipped, somebody always missing one shoe, and me doing that tired parent math where you try to get two small humans out the door without raising your voice. Then the school nurse called and she said my son had taken a hard fall on the playground. He was alert, but they wanted to double check emergency contacts and permissions before they decided if he needed urgent. I was already grabbing my keys and I told her yes, call me if anything changes, I am on my way. Then she said something that made my brain snag. She asked if Kieran Maddox was still the second emergency contact, and if he was still authorized for pickup, and I actually stopped walking like my feet just quit on me because I do not know a Kieran Maddox. I asked her to repeat it because I thought maybe she misread the screen, maybe it was a typo, maybe she was reading the wrong kid file. She repeated the name again, and then she added very casually that the paperwork had been updated recently, and the system showed that I was listed as first contact, and Kieran was listed as second, and my wife Sloane was listed as third. Third behind a man I have never met. I told her there had to be a mistake, and she did that patient school staff tone, the one where they are nice but they are also ready for the conversation to go sideways. And she said she could only tell me what the file said, and she asked if I wanted them to remove him, and I said yes. And then I had to say out loud, I am the dad, I did not add him, I do not know who that is. She told me I would need to come in and update the paperwork in person with ID, because they do not do removals over the phone, and she asked again if my son had any medical conditions they should know about, and my brain was doing two things at once, one part trying to be a normal parent answering normal questions, the other part trying to keep from driving straight into the sun. By the time I got to the school office, my son Milo was sitting on one of those vinyl chairs with a little ice pack wrapped in a paper towel. He looked embarrassed more than hurt. He kept saying he tripped and he was fine and he did not want me to make a big deal, and I was doing the dad thing, checking his pupils, checking his hands, checking his knees. But my eyes kept sliding to the front desk computer because I could see the nurse tab open, and I could see the contact list with 3 names. And that unfamiliar one was right there like it belonged. The secretary offered me the clipboard with the emergency card, and I stared at the handwriting because it was my wife handwriting. I know her loops and how she crosses her T, and I could see where she had neatly written Kieran Maddox's phone number and a little note that said trusted friend, can pick up either child. I asked for the date on the form, and the secretary said it was submitted just under 2 weeks ago, and it had come in with the other start of term updates, and she said they had processed it like any other because it had both parents' names and signatures. I asked to see the signature, and there it was, my name written in something that kind of looked like my signature if you squint, but not really, like someone had practiced it a few times, got the idea, then went for it fast. My actual signature is sloppy, this one was careful. I felt my face get hot and then cold, then hot again, and I asked if they could print me a copy, and the secretary hesitated, then did it anyway, and she kept watching me like she was waiting for me to start yelling, but I could not even yell. My throat felt tight, like all the air in the room was gone. I signed the removal form right there. I put my ID on the counter. I wrote in big block letters that only parents are authorized pickup, and I asked them to flag the file, and the secretary said she could put a note for staff. But if my wife had legal custody, she could add people back unless there was a court order, and she said it gently, like she had said that sentence 100 times to people having the worst day of their lives. I drove Milo home because he was shaky, and because I could not stop looking at him in the rearview mirror, thinking about some stranger being allowed to take him, thinking about my daughter Esme in preschool across town, thinking about how I did not even know this man's face, and the only thing between him and my kids was a policy and a receptionist who might be busy and a day that goes wrong. Sloane was at work. She does shift work at a rehab clinic. She always has, and usually I do not bother her while she is on shift unless something is actually urgent. But this felt like the definition of urgent, so I called her and she did not answer, and I called again, and when she finally picked up she sounded annoyed like I interrupted her lunch, and I asked her who Kieran Maddox is, and why he is listed as an emergency contact for our kids, and why she signed my name to it. There was a pause, not a shocked pause, not a confused pause, a pause like she was deciding which version of the story to give me. Then she said, "You are being dramatic. It is an emergency contact. It is not a will. It is not like I signed the kids over." I said, "I am not being dramatic. You put a stranger on the pickup list, a stranger I have never met. You forged my signature, and you pushed me down to first contact while you put yourself third. Why would you even do that? Why would you make it so the school calls him before they call you?" She sighed and she said, "Kieran is not a stranger. He is a friend. He helps, and I knew you would freak out, so I handled it because I am tired of you acting like you are the only capable adult." I asked how he helps, and she said he is reliable, he is calm, and he is available when she is on shift. And she said sometimes I am hard to reach, which is rich, because my job is literally being reachable. I work it for a mid-size company. I keep a phone on me at all times. I have never missed a school call, not once. I asked her why she did not add her sister, why she did not add her dad, why she did not add our neighbor who watches the kids sometimes, why this random man, and she snapped and said stop calling him random, and then she said the part that cracked the whole thing open. She said I was acting jealous, like this was about my ego, like I could not handle her having male friends. I was quiet for a second because jealousy was not what I felt. Fear was what I felt, and it was also a weird kind of nausea, like the floor moved under me, because if she jumped to jealousy that fast, it usually means there is something to be jealous about. I asked her if she was sleeping with him and she laughed, actually laughed, and said, "I cannot believe you just said that." And then she said no, and she said I am overreacting, and she said she cannot do this right now, and she hung up. I stood in my kitchen staring at the copy of the school form like it was going to change if I stared hard enough. Milo was on the couch watching cartoons, Esme was napping, and my hands were shaking so badly I had to set the paper down on the counter and grip the edge just to steady myself. I did the thing you do when you know you should not. I went looking for Kieran Maddox, but I did it in the least dramatic way possible. I did not snoop her phone, I did not hack anything. I just searched the name in the school directory because they have a volunteer portal list for events, and I found a K. Maddox listed as a safety volunteer, and the picture was a man around my age, maybe a little older, dark hair, the kind of smile that is too practiced. And the volunteer role was listed as Emergency Preparedness Liaison, which sounded made up, but it was there. Seeing his face made it worse, because now he was real. Sloane came home late. She walked in like the day was normal. She greeted the kids. She kissed Esme's head. She asked Milo how his knee was, and she did not look at me, and when the kids went back to their rooms, I asked her to sit down, and she did that slow exhale like I was a chore. I told her I had removed him from the school file, and I told her I was calling the preschool next, and I told her she was not adding anyone else without talking to me first, and she rolled her eyes and said, "You do not get to order me around." I said, "This is not about ordering you around, this is about our kids not being handed over to a man I have never met." And she said, "You are acting like he is dangerous." And I said, "I do not know if he is dangerous, that is the point, I do not know him at all, you hid him from me, you forged my name and you are minimizing it." She said she did not forge my name, she said she wrote it. And then she corrected herself and said fine, she signed it because the school needed it processed and she knew I would drag it out, and she said she was trying to be proactive. I asked her why she put herself third, and she said because she cannot always answer because her job is not flexible, and she said if there is an emergency she wants someone calm, and then she said again that I overreact in emergencies. That sentence stuck with me because it was so convenient, like she had built a whole story to justify pushing me down, and it made me realize she was not just adding a backup contact, she was building an alternate chain of custody, like she wanted the calls to go to someone who would follow her instructions without questioning them. I asked if Kieran had ever met our kids, and she hesitated, and then she said he has been around, and I asked what that meant, and she said he has seen them at events. And then she said in that flat tone, he helped once when she had to pick up Esme early and she could not get away, and she said it like it was normal, like it was not a giant thing she never told me. I asked if he picked up our daughter, and she said yes once from preschool because she had already put him on the list there, and she said it like she was proving a point, like, "See, nothing happened, so you should calm down." I felt my stomach drop, and I asked when, and she said a while ago. She could not remember exactly, and I asked why I did not get a call, and she said because she handled it, and she said you do not need to know every detail, and she said you do not own my time. This is where it shifted from scary to unreal, because it is one thing to have a backup person, it is another thing to give that person access to your kids, then hide it, then act like the person who is upset is the problem. I told her I was calling the preschool in the morning to remove him, and she told me if I did that she would add him back, and she said she has equal rights, and she said I do not get to isolate her. I did not sleep, not really. I lay there listening to her breathe like she did not have a care in the world, and my brain kept looping on one image, a stranger holding my daughter's hand walking her out of a building, and staff smiling because the file says he is allowed. In the morning, I went to the preschool office with my ID, and I asked for the contact list, and the receptionist pulled it up, and there it was, Kieran Maddox, authorized pickup, and the receptionist said he had picked Esme up one time when she had a fever, and she said he was polite, and she said everything went smoothly, like that was supposed to comfort me. I asked for the paperwork, and it was another form with my name signed in that careful imitation, and the date on it was months back, which told me this was not a random decision 2 weeks ago. This had been running quietly in the background for a long time. I removed him there too, and the receptionist gave me the same warning, any parent can add unless there is a court order, and she said it like she was reading a script. I sat in my car afterward and stared at the steering wheel, and I realized the next step was not another argument in my kitchen, because Sloane was not treating this like a partnership problem, she was treating it like a power problem, and she already proved she was willing to lie. So I called the county family court clerk and asked what the process was for an emergency custody motion, not because I wanted to take the kids, but because I wanted a piece of paper that made it impossible for her to quietly swap our kids' safety net with a man I do not know. The clerk told me what forms I needed, where to file, and that I could ask for an expedited hearing if there was a safety concern, and I could hear in her voice she had heard everything. She did not sound shocked, she sounded efficient, which somehow made it worse because it meant this happens. When Sloane got home that night, she saw the preschool removal confirmation on the counter, and she went cold, not sad, not scared, cold, and she told me I was trying to punish her, and she told me I was making her life harder on purpose, and then she said if I did not stop she would make sure I regretted it. I asked her what that meant and she stared at me, then she smiled a little and said you are not the only one who can file paperwork. I slept on the couch with my phone in my hand, and I set alarms every hour like a lunatic, because my brain kept telling me that if she could put him on a pickup list, she could also do something else while I was asleep, and I hated myself for thinking it, but I hated her more for making it plausible. The next day, the school called again, not the nurse, the assistant principal, and she asked me to come in because there was an issue with the pickup list, and my stomach turned over because I knew what it meant before she said it. When I got there, the secretary looked embarrassed, and she told me they had received an updated authorization form dropped off that morning, and it reinstated Kieran Maddox as pickup authorized, and it had both signatures again, and she said they had not processed it yet because she noticed the handwriting looked off, and she wanted to verify in person. I asked who dropped it off, and she said Kieran did, and she said he came in confident like he belonged there, and he told them Sloane had asked him to handle it. That was the moment my chest went tight because now he was not just a name on paper, he was walking into my kid's school with documents, he was talking to staff, he was inserting himself into a space that is supposed to be safe. The assistant principal asked me if there was a custody issue they should know about, and I told her not yet, but there will be, and I told her to flag the file as disputed, and she said they could, but they needed something official to block a parent request, and she said she was sorry and she meant it, but policies do not care about sorry. I left the school and called Sloane, and she answered right away like she was waiting, and I asked her if she sent Kieran to the school with a form, and she said yes, and she said if I want to play games, she can play too, and she said Kieran is part of the kid's life whether I like it or not. I asked her why she is doing this, why she is forcing him into the kid's world, and she said because he shows up, because he actually helps, and because she is done asking permission. I asked again if she is sleeping with him, and she said stop fixating on that, and then she said something worse. She said even if she was, it would not be my business because our marriage has been dead for a long time. We still lived in the same house, we still ate dinner at the same table, we still rotated bath time, and she says the marriage is dead like it is a settled fact, like she flipped a switch and forgot to tell me. That night she did not come to bed, she stayed on the couch with her phone, and I watched the hallway like a guard, because I did not know what else to do. I was not going to start a screaming match in front of our kids, but I also was not going to pretend this was just a disagreement about paperwork. I filed the emergency motion the next morning, I attached copies of the forms, and I wrote in plain language that I believed a non-family adult was being inserted into our children emergency access without my knowledge, that signatures were forged, that the other parent had acted to override removals, and that there was an immediate risk of unauthorized pickup. I did not feel triumphant, I felt sick, because filing that paper felt like admitting my marriage was not fixable, and I did not want to admit that, but I wanted my kids safe more than I wanted to keep pretending we were a normal family. By the time I left the courthouse, I had a hearing date set for the following week, and I had instructions on how to request a temporary restraining order related to the children if I believed there was active interference. And I sat in the parking structure stairwell with my head in my hands because I had never been this person before. I had never been the dad with paperwork and fear, and a name I do not recognize hovering over my kids like a shadow. When I got home, Sloane was waiting, and she had that calm face she uses in public, the one that makes people assume she is the reasonable one, and she told me she got served by the court notification, and she said I was making a huge mistake, and she told me the judge would see I am unstable. I told her I did not care what she called me, the only thing I cared about was that Kieran will not be able to pick up our kids again, not from school, not from preschool, not from anywhere. She stared at me and she said, quietly, "You are going to force me to show you why I picked him." Then she walked away like she had dropped a rock in my stomach on purpose, and she left it there to sink. Update 1 week later. I thought the week before the hearing would be tense, but I did not expect it to turn into a full-time job of reacting to whatever Sloane tried next. Because she did not back off, she escalated, and she did it in ways that made me look paranoid if you did not know the whole story. The morning after I filed, I got a call from the pediatric clinic, not the doctor, the front desk, and the receptionist asked me to confirm our emergency contacts, because they had received an update request, and she said it was signed by Sloane, and it added Kieran Maddox as someone authorized to bring the kids in for care and receive information. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so bold. She was trying to build a full access path, school, preschool, medical, anything that could be used to move our kids around without me. The receptionist told me they could lock the account with a password, and I said yes, and I gave them a word that only I would know, and then I asked if they could note that no one but parents can modify contacts without both parents present, and she said they could note it, but legally they still have to accept forms from a custodial parent, unless there is a court order. And there it was again, that phrase, court order, like a magic spell everyone needs to protect a child from something obvious. I did not tell Milo or Esme anything, not directly, but kids are not blind. Milo asked why I looked tired all the time, and I told him grown-up stuff was stressful. And he nodded like he had heard that answer before, because kids always do. And Esme kept asking where mom was at night, because Sloane started doing the thing where she stays out late, then comes home and acts like nothing happened, and she would tell the kids she had extra paperwork at work, and Milo would accept it. But he started watching her, and I hated that. I hated her for pulling them into adult tension without even speaking it. On the third day of that week, I got a call from the school again, and my chest did that tight thing, but this time it was the secretary, and she told me someone had called asking about Milo's dismissal schedule and whether he takes the bus. And she said the caller claimed to be family, but she did not give details, and the secretary said she refused to confirm anything, but she wanted me to know because it felt off. I asked if she recognized the voice, and she said she was not sure, but she thought it was a man, and then she hesitated and said it sounded like the same man who dropped off the authorization form, and she said she had not wanted to assume, but she felt like it should be documented. I thanked her and I wrote down everything she said, because my lawyer, yes I got one, told me to start documenting, not in an emotional way, but in a boring, factual way, times, dates, who said what the school did, what forms were submitted, what was removed, what got resubmitted, and I hated that this was my life now, like I was building a file against the person I married. I met with the lawyer at her office, and I picked her partly because she was blunt. She did not do comforting phrases. She did not tell me everything will be okay. She looked at the forms and said, this is serious. This is a pattern of interference, and she told me to stop arguing with Sloane verbally because it creates messy he said she said situations. And she told me to focus on preventing access, getting the temporary order, and keeping everything kid-centered. She also told me not to try to play detective, not to follow Kieran, not to confront him, not to show up at his workplace, and that sounded obvious, but she said it like she had seen people burn their own case by letting adrenaline drive them. The hearing was set for the end of the week, and in the meantime Sloane tried a different tactic. She started being sweet around the kids, overly sweet. She started volunteering for bedtime. She started baking muffins. She started hugging Milo longer than usual. She started calling me by my old nickname, and it felt fake because it arrived the same day she got served, like she was preparing a stage where she could point at me and say, see, he is the angry one, I am just a mom trying. Then the actual scary thing happened. On the morning of Milo's school field trip, the one he has been excited about for weeks, I got a call from the school office while I was at work, and the secretary said there was a pickup issue. She said Milo was safe, but they needed me to come down if possible, and her voice was tight. I told my manager I had an emergency, and I drove over, and when I walked into the office, Kieran was standing by the counter, and he was holding a printed form like it was a ticket, and he was smiling that polite smile, and he said my name like we were already acquainted. The secretary looked relieved when she saw me, and the assistant principal stepped out of her office, and she asked Kieran to step back, and he did, but he did it slowly like he was performing calmness for an audience. I asked what he was doing there, and he said Sloane asked him to pick Milo up because she had an emergency at work, and he said he was trying to help, and he said he did not understand why I was making it difficult, and he said it with that controlled tone that makes you sound like a problem if you respond emotionally. I did not yell, I did not swear, I kept my voice low, and I told him he is not allowed to pick up my child, and I told him he should not be here, and I asked him how he got my kid's information, and he said Sloane gave it to him, and he said he is listed on the paperwork, and he held it out like proof. The assistant principal told him they would not release Milo to him, because the file was flagged as disputed and because I had already removed him, and she said it calmly but firmly, and she asked him to leave, and he started to argue, not loud but persistent. He kept saying he was authorized, he kept saying he had a form, he kept saying he was only trying to help. I could see what he was doing. He wanted staff to feel like they were being unreasonable. He wanted to plant that story that he was the nice guy and I was the controlling dad, and I hated that he was good at it. I told the assistant principal there is a court hearing pending, and my attorney is filing for a temporary order, and I said it without extra details because I did not want to turn the school office into my courtroom, but I wanted them to understand this was not a casual disagreement. Kieran looked at me then, actually looked, and his smile slipped just for a second, and then it came back, and he said he hopes I get the help I need, and he said it softly like a dig, and then he walked out. I went to Milo's classroom and asked to speak to him briefly, and when he came out he looked confused, and I asked if he knows Kieran, and Milo shrugged. Then he said he had seen him with mom once, and he said Kieran had brought them snacks at a school event, and he said Kieran told him he is mom's friend, and Milo said it like he was repeating something he was told to say. My chest tightened again because now my kid had been coached, not overtly but subtly, introduced to a stranger as mom's friend, normalized, smoothed in, and the whole time I was in the dark. That night I did not confront Sloane with fireworks. I did something colder. I asked her, in a neutral voice, why Kieran tried to pick up our son from school, and she said she did not send him. She said he offered. She said she was overwhelmed, and she said I should be grateful someone cares. I asked if she understands how close that came to being a disaster, and she said nothing happened, and then she said the line that made me stop. She said if I would just stop fighting, things could go smoothly. Stop fighting meaning stop resisting her plan. I told her the hearing is still happening, and I told her my lawyer is requesting a temporary order specifically banning Kieran from being an emergency contact and from having pickup authority, and I told her any further forged forms will be documented, and she looked at me like she was measuring me. She said you are going to lose, and she said judges do not like unstable men, and then she went upstairs and shut the bedroom door. The day of the hearing, we sat in the courthouse waiting area not near each other, and I watched her. She looked composed, hair neat, clothes pressed, and she barely looked at me, and when the bailiff called our case, she walked in like she had practiced. Kieran was not inside the courtroom, but he was in the hallway leaning against the wall like he belonged there, and he did not speak to me, he just watched. Inside, the judge asked why we were there. My attorney spoke first. She laid out the pattern, the forged signatures, the unauthorized contact additions, the attempted pickup, the repeated overrides. And she asked for a temporary order preventing either parent from adding third-party pickup authorization without written mutual consent, and specifically barring Kieran Maddox from contact with the children pending a full custody evaluation. Sloan attorney argued back. He said I was trying to control who my wife can be friends with. He said the kids were never in danger. He said Kieran is a trusted family friend. He said I was escalating because I was insecure. The judge listened, then he looked at Sloan and he asked her directly why she did not tell me about adding Kieran and why my signature appeared on forms I did not sign. Sloan did not deny it, she softened it. She said she signed because she thought I would agree. She said she was under pressure. She said I am hard to reach. She said she was trying to make sure the kids were covered. The judge asked why she listed herself third and she hesitated. Then she said because she was on shift sometimes and she wanted someone available. And the judge asked why that someone was not a relative, and she said Kieran is like family. The judge asked if Kieran is her romantic partner, and Sloan froze for half a second. Then she said no, and her attorney tried to redirect, and the judge held up a hand and asked again, and Sloan said no. My attorney requested the judge allow us to submit an affidavit from the school secretary about the pickup attempt, and the judge said yes, and he asked the clerk to schedule a follow-up hearing in a few weeks. Then he granted the temporary order. My attorney asked for not full custody, but an order that neither parent can add or remove emergency contacts or pickup authorizations without mutual written agreement, and that Kieran Maddox is not to be listed or used as pickup or contact, and that any attempted interference will be considered in the custody determination. I did not feel relief so much as exhaustion, because even with the order I could tell this was not over. Sloan walked out of the courtroom and did not look at me, and Kieran stepped away from the wall and walked beside her like they arrived together, and she did not stop him. Update 3 weeks later. The temporary order should have calmed things down, but it actually made Sloan angrier because now her ability to quietly adjust the kid's life was blocked, and she started going after me in ways that did not require school forms. A few days after the hearing, I got a knock on the door, and it was a caseworker. She said she was there because of a report about the kids' safety. She did not tell me who called, but she did not have to because I knew. She asked to see the kids. She asked about food, bedtime, discipline, bruises, school attendance. She looked in the fridge. She looked at the bathrooms. She asked Milo if he feels safe, and Milo looked at me like he was trying to figure out if he was allowed to answer. And I told him to just tell the truth, and he said yes, he feels safe, and then he asked if he was in trouble. The caseworker told me it would be closed if she saw no concerns, and she said she could see I was trying, and she said sometimes reports are used in custody disputes, and she said it gently like she did not want to call it out, but she did. And after she left, I sat on the kitchen floor and shook because I had never had someone inspect my house like that, and I realized Sloan was not just angry, she was willing to put a spotlight on our kids to punish me. I told my attorney, and she told me to keep every piece of paper, and she told me to remain calm, and she told me not to retaliate with my own reports unless there is an actual concern, and she said judges can tell the difference between a safety issue and a strategy. The next escalation came from the school. Again, the assistant principal called and told me a man had shown up asking to speak to Milo teacher about an alleged bullying incident, and he claimed to be a step-parent, and he said he was part of the family, and he wanted information. It was Kieran, and the school refused to share anything, and they told him he is not authorized, and then they called me because they were worried about the pattern. That was the first time the school staff sounded genuinely alarmed, not politely cautious, alarmed, because it is one thing for a name to be on a form, it is another thing for someone to actively insert themselves into a child's academic life and try to access information, and they could feel it was not normal. I asked them to document every attempt, and they said they would, and I could tell they were doing it now because they were protecting themselves too, not just me. Because a school does not want to be the place where a kid gets taken by the wrong adult, and they do not want to be on the news, and I do not blame them for that, but I hate that it takes the threat of disaster for people to lock things down. Sloane moved out for a bit, not officially. She started staying with her cousin Marin, and she told the kids it was because she had a noisy sleep schedule, and she told me it was because she could not stand being around my controlling energy, and she said it like she was describing a smell. We started doing custody exchanges in public places with cameras and staff, not because I wanted drama, but because my attorney told me to keep exchanges neutral and documented, and because I did not trust her not to show up with Kieran and create a scene, and also because the kids do better when the adults do not perform anger in their face. For a while, it was just tense but predictable. Then I got a call from the court clerk, and she said Sloane had filed an emergency motion of her own. She claimed I was withholding the children, she claimed I was violating the temporary order, and she claimed I was alienating the kids from her. None of it was true. The temporary order did not change our physical custody schedule. It changed decision-making and third-party access, but she was trying to twist it into a narrative where I was taking the kids, and she filed it like an emergency to force a faster hearing. My attorney was furious, but in a calm way she said this is what people do when they do not like boundaries. They try to turn the boundary into abuse, and she told me to keep following the schedule, keep communications minimal, and let the court see the pattern. The follow-up hearing happened, and this time the judge was less patient. He asked why Sloane filed an emergency motion when the kids were still seeing her, and her attorney tried to argue that my behavior was intimidating, that I was creating a hostile environment, and the judge asked for evidence and there was none. Then my attorney submitted the school affidavit, and it included the details about Kieran attempting pickup, the repeated paperwork submissions, and the calls asking about bus schedules and the attempted teacher access, and the judge read it slowly, and his face did not change, but his tone did. It got sharper. He asked Sloane if she understood that third-party access attempts after an order can be seen as interference, and Sloane said she cannot control what Kieran does, and the judge looked at her and said that is not a satisfying answer because she is the person who introduced him into this, she is the person who authorized him, and she is the person the court expects to set boundaries. Then the judge asked the question nobody wanted to ask out loud. He asked why Kieran is so invested in the children's schedules and access, and why he is showing up repeatedly, and Sloane started to cry, not a messy cry, a controlled cry, and she said he cares, and she said he wants to help, and she said she has been alone in the marriage and he made her feel supported. My attorney asked the judge for a modified temporary order, one that specifically barred Kieran from approaching the children at school or childcare, not just being listed as pickup, and one that required Sloane to disclose any third party she is involving in the children's care, and one that placed a temporary restriction on taking the children out of the county without written mutual consent. The judge granted it, and he also ordered both of us to use a court-approved co-parenting communication platform, not because it is magical, but because it keeps a record, and he told Sloane directly that continued attempts to circumvent will negatively impact custody outcomes. Outside the courtroom, Sloane did not scream. She walked up close and whispered that I had humiliated her, and she said I am going to regret making her look bad, and then she turned and walked away like she was above it. I drove home and my hands were shaking again, and I realized my life had become a series of rooms where other people decide whether my kids are safe. And I could not shake the thought that Sloane did not seem scared of the court. She seemed angry that the court was in her way. That night, Milo asked if Mom was mad at him, and I told him no, none of this is his fault, and he nodded. And then he asked if Kieran was coming to his birthday because Kieran had apparently told him he would bring a special surprise someday. That sentence made my blood go cold because it meant Kieran was making promises to my kid, building himself into my kid future. And Milo said it casually, like it was normal, like adults had been planting seeds in his head while I was not there. I did not freak out on Milo. I asked him where he heard that, and Milo said Mom told him Kieran is someone who helps, and Kieran told him he is going to be around, and Milo said it like he was trying to be a good kid repeating approved information. I told my attorney the next morning, and she said it matters because it shows ongoing contact and influence, and she told me to request a custody evaluator, and she told me to request a no-contact provision not just for pickups but for any direct communication between Kieran and the children. The court scheduled mediation, and I walked into that room feeling like my skin did not fit right. Sloane came in looking calm again, and Kieran was not there because he was not allowed. But the mediator mentioned his name anyway because it was the center of the dispute, and that alone felt disgusting, like my children's safety had become a debate topic. During mediation, Sloane finally admitted something, not fully but enough that the room changed. She admitted she had been seeing Kieran. She called it complicated. She said it started as emotional support. She said it became physical later. And she said she did not tell me because she knew I would take the kids away from her. The mediator asked why she involved him with the children before telling me, and Sloane said she needed someone dependable because she planned to move out, and she did not trust me to cooperate, and she said she wanted a backup plan. Backup plan meaning a second adult position to access my kids without me. My attorney pressed for a timeline and Sloan got defensive and she said I am twisting it, and she said Kieran never intended harm and she said I am acting like she is a criminal. The mediator ended the session early because it was going nowhere, and as we left, Sloan looked at me and said quietly that she never would have needed a backup plan if I had been a better husband. That is what hurt in a weird way, not because I believe her, but because she genuinely believes she can justify anything by blaming me, including putting our kids' access in a stranger's hands. Final update 2 months later. This is the part where people expect some clean ending, like somebody gets exposed, somebody gets punished, and everyone claps, but the way it actually ended was quieter and more exhausting than that, and it came down to paperwork and patterns and a judge who paid attention. The custody evaluation process moved faster than I expected, mostly because the school documentation was so consistent. They had dates, they had notes, they had staff statements that were written in that careful, neutral tone institutions use, and the evaluator spoke to both of us, spoke to the kids, and spoke to the school, and the same story kept showing up, that there was a repeated attempt to insert Kieran into the kids' access points, and that boundaries were not respected even after court intervention. Sloan tried to pivot her narrative. She stopped saying I was jealous and started saying she made a mistake. She started saying she only wanted support. She started saying she would never do it again, but she also kept minimizing the forgery. She kept calling it signing for me like that phrase makes it less serious. And the evaluator did not buy it because the evaluator asked her the simplest question: if you knew it was fine, why not tell the other parent? And Sloan did not have a real answer. The big twist, the one that made the court clamp down hard, came from the school district itself. The superintendent office contacted my attorney not to help me personally, but to address a complaint that had been filed against the school staff for refusing pickup. The complaint was submitted in Kieran's name, and it claimed discrimination, and it demanded the district discipline the secretary for denying access. Kieran basically tried to pressure the district into treating him like a legal guardian, and the district responded by pulling the whole record. And in doing that, they discovered something that none of us knew. Kieran had been flagged in another custody situation in a neighboring district, not as a convicted anything, but as a person named in a prior no-contact order involving a child he was not related to, which is why he had not been allowed to volunteer in that district anymore. When that information hit the evaluator's report, Sloan's attorney tried to object, but the judge allowed it because it was directly relevant to child safety, and because it was not gossip, it was an official court record tied to the same person who had attempted access to my children multiple times. At the final hearing, Sloan sat at her table looking smaller than before, not because she suddenly felt remorse, but because the room stopped treating her story as just a marriage issue. It became a child safety issue with documented patterns, and that changes everything. The judge issued the final order. I was granted primary physical custody, and joint legal custody remained on paper, but with a clear structure, major decisions had to be made through written documented agreement. Exchanges were scheduled and supervised for a period. And the most important part for me, there was a strict no-contact provision for Kieran, no direct contact with Milo or Esme, no school involvement, no childcare pickup, no appearing at extracurriculars, no communication through Sloan, and the order explicitly stated that any violation could trigger an immediate review of Sloan parenting time. Sloan tried to argue that she should be allowed to have her partner around the kids eventually, and the judge said not until she demonstrates consistent boundaries and compliance over time. And he said it in plain terms, not cruel, just firm. And then he told her that forging a co-parent's signature on child-related documents is not a small thing. It is the kind of behavior that destroys trust and increases risk. After court, there was no big scene, no shouting, no dramatic confession in the hallway. Sloan signed the order, her attorney gathered papers, and she walked out without looking at me, and Kieran was not there this time because he knew he could not be, and because the building has deputies and metal detectors and consequences. The practical aftermath was weirdly simple. I took certified copies of the order to the school, the preschool, and the pediatric clinic, and every front desk person treated me differently once I slid that paper across the counter. Like the order turned my fear into something official they were allowed to act on. The school updated the file, the preschool added a password, the clinic locked contacts. And the secretary who first warned me about the pickup attempt quietly told me she was glad I did not let it slide. Sloan parenting time started under supervision at a local family visitation center. The kids did not understand why they could not just go with mom like before. Milo asked if mom was in trouble and I kept my answers simple. I told him the grown-ups have rules right now and the rules are to keep everyone safe, and he nodded. And then he asked if Kieran was mad at him like a kid would, because kids assume everything is their fault. A month into the new schedule, the visitation center reported that Sloan showed up once with Kieran waiting in the car across the street, not at the entrance but visible like a signal, and the supervisor documented it, and my attorney filed it, and the judge warned her through a written notice that this was a violation of the spirit of the order. And it stopped after that, either because Sloan finally understood or because Kieran got bored. I do not know, and I do not want to know. The only part that feels like a real ending is that the attempts stopped, the school stopped calling me with alerts, the clinic stopped flagging new contact requests, my phone stopped buzzing with new surprises, and the kids started acting like kids again instead of little weather vanes reading adult tension. Last week, Milo got off the bus grinning because he got picked to be line leader for the first time. Esme ran up with a paper turkey craft, and we walked inside together, and there was no strange name hovering over their lives anymore.